the Financial Survival Network. Now more than ever.
And welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. Well, stagflation is officially here. Mortgage interest rates are above 5%. What does it all mean for the United States, the global economy, and the stock market, and everything else, maybe even gold, silver? Let's set our sights on dollarcollapse.com's John Rubino. So, John, what does it all mean?
Kerry, it means lots of bad things. You know, stagflation is one of the worst environments for an economy to be in because nobody's happy. You know, prices are going up, so life is getting harder. You're not making any more money at work because the economy is not growing, so life just gets harder and harder. You, in turn, start looking for ways to vote the incumbents out of office because you're mad at them and you blame them for what's happening. And so you have political turmoil on top of financial turmoil. And that's kind of what we're getting right now. There's a chart on Zero Hedge, which I sent you, that shows the relationship between inflation and economic growth right now. And it used to be that they tracked pretty well. But now there's this huge divergence where inflation is going up and growth expectations are falling. So the gap between those two lines is turning into a chasm. And that's, it's a visual depiction of stagflation right now. So we're kind of there. And, it's not clear how we get out of it because the Fed is still tightening, which means the economy is liable to slow down as interest rates go up. We'll have to talk about the effects of rising interest rates in a sec. But if you don't have growth accelerating and inflation is not coming unstuck, it's still high because we've got all this, all the impacts of the Russia-Ukraine war and all that money that they printed out during the COVID pandemic, and all of that stuff is still in the system and causing prices, especially food prices, but not only food prices, to go up. So you got inflation that's going to rise no matter what in the near term, and a slowing economy. And, the Fed cannot fix this. The Fed can't make more wheat or more oil. So you can't fix a lot of our current supply chain problems with monetary policy. And that's all we've got. We don't have any supply chain fixes. We've just got easier money. And that's gone now. So, this next year is going to be really tumultuous, and I think we'll see just how tumultuous when we see what happens in the midterm elections for U.S. Congress, because right now it's not looking good for the incumbents, which means there's going to be one of those kick the bums out episodes, which just exacerbate all the turmoil in other aspects of our lives. So, here we go, another crazy year.
Another crazy year, and there's no way out of this, like you said, because they can't print up more wheat, they can't print up more water, they can't print up more oil. Nat gas prices, as an example of inflation. We went over this. I explained numerous times why nat gas was more important than oil because of the way the usage has shifted over the years. Like, people used to use oil and they'd switch between oil and nat gas depending which was cheaper. Nat gas has been cheaper for years and everybody just permanently switched to it. It's now like over $7.50 per million BTU. That is like the highest it's been since '08, John.
And it's way more than that in Europe. I think the nat gas story is really a European story. As more than it is here, even though here it's a story, it's an inconvenience. There, it's kind of an existential threat. When your main fuel source goes up by some big multiple, not just 30 or 40 or 50%, but 3 or 4 times in the space of a year, you've got chaos there, and that's kind of what it's looking like. And so now you've got Russia sitting out there saying, okay, we can get you some natural gas, but you have to pay rubles for it. You got to pay our currency now. So Europe has kind of a double-barreled issue there where their energy costs are way up, and they may not be able to use the euro to buy that energy anymore, which is a potential monetary problem for them. So, this is one of those multifaceted problems that is an issue no matter what from what angle you approach it. And yeah, I think we'll see, a big part of this blow up in Europe first, and then spread around to the rest of the world. So watch Europe in the next year. And, especially if we're still like this next winter, then it's just chaos. But even during the summer, it's going to be a problem. And it'll be something that'll be, borderline headline news for quite a while.
Hey, well, John, when you're talking about Europe and the economy, look at where the dollar is at. The dollar is over 100 on the Dixie. That's the DXY index. And that hasn't happened in several years.
Well, yeah, the dollar index, people think of it as, oh, it's the dollar against a basket of currencies, but it's so weighted towards the euro and secondarily towards the yen that it's really just those two currencies versus the dollar. And so what's happening lately is, we've got our problems here, but Europe and Japan have so much bigger problems that people are buying dollars and getting out of those other currencies. The euro has really tanked. And that's inflationary. So Europe's inflation can't help but increase dramatically if their currency is falling against the dollar at the current rate. And that forces the ECB into tightening into an economy that can't handle tight money. Europe is just a very weak, messed up economic system with a lot of countries like Italy and Greece that just can't function unless the ECB is buying all their bonds and their equivalent of the 10-year Treasury bond rate is less than the US rate. And, who in the right mind lends money to Italy for 10 years at a rate less than what you get from treasuries? And people have been doing that, but the only reason they've been doing that is because the ECB has been standing ready to buy Italian bonds, which makes Italian bonds effectively German bonds because the German economy is the backstop for that whole thing. When you take that away, make Italy stand on its own 2 feet financially, and they collapse, that economy will just evaporate. And so Europe is looking at something like that, where the ECB is going to stop buying European bonds, which is to say Italian, Greek, and Portuguese bonds, and raise interest rates. So the Italian bond yield will have to find its natural level, which, based on just fundamentals, it would be like 14%, right? So Italy is toast. And so are a lot of the other peripheral Eurozone countries. So anyhow, Europe is liable to be the epicenter of what's coming. But that's not to say just because we aren't quite as bad and the dollar is up that we're in any kind of good shape at all, because we're a mess here too. It's just that we're not quite as badly messed up as some other places in the world.
Yes. Oh, that's so true, John. Like the world is certainly a glorious mess and there's no end in sight. There is now a new candidate for most dangerous job in the world, and that is it's replacing the New York City convenience store clerk after dark, and that is a Russian general, right?
Yeah, there's no sheet of bulletproof glass in front of the counter for the Russian generals. Russia is sustaining some very serious losses in Ukraine, which they didn't expect. They expected to go in and just slice right through this third world country they were invading, get it over with, pull back out, and then make their point about NATO not being allowed on Russia's border. It got a lot more complicated than that, though, because, in part because Russia didn't want to just go in and kill a bunch of civilians and blow up cities. So they put some restraints on their military. And in part, it's just not going as well for them as they expected. They're meeting a lot more resistance, and they're not quite as good as they thought they were.
Quite bad, in fact. Quite awful.
Yeah, so it's interesting how this is going to play out. Let's say they settle this tomorrow. Okay, let's be really optimistic and say they come to an agreement. Russia pulls out. Ukraine is neutralized. Russia has had its military reputation tarnished badly, so they're not as scary as they used to be. On the other hand, they've accelerated their de-dollarization as part of this in response to the sanctions that the West put on them. And now they're feeling confident that they can get paid in rubles for natural gas because Europe needs that gas so badly. And they they're cutting trade deals with other countries like India and China, where they're going to use their own currencies. And this was always going to happen. We were always heading in that direction because the US, the morons in charge of US monetary policy, were using the dollar as a weapon, which is a huge problem for the world's reserve currency. And it was chasing other countries out of the dollar-centric global financial system. And the reason for that is very important. We need to focus on why we're screwing up. And that is because the world's reserve currency needs to be neutral. If it's the currency that everybody's going to use for foreign trade and everybody's going to hold in their foreign exchange reserves, doing so cannot benefit one country at the expense of other countries, because then you're kind of voting for and against other countries, including yourself, when you use dollars. And instead of downplaying that to the point where it's not a thing, and being super even-handed and neutral in our monetary relations around the world, we've used the dollar as a weapon. Anybody steps out of line, we say, we're kicking you out of the SWIFT system, or we're going to confiscate your bank accounts here in New York or London or wherever. And so everybody now in the world realizes that you cannot trust your bank accounts if they're held in say, London or New York. And you can't trust your bank's ability to continue to operate on a global stage if the US can kick them out of the settlement system anytime they feel like it, for whatever reason they deem appropriate, And so that's going to lead other blocks of countries to look for alternatives through which they can trade and otherwise transact, using their own currencies, and hold each other's currencies as reserves and buy energy with each other's currencies, and basically just bypass the dollar system. That's a catastrophe for the dollar, because it's wildly overvalued if it's not the world's sole reserve currency. You make it just one of many, one of 8 different currencies that a reasonable central bank can hold. And then the dollar has to go down to the value that reflects that new status, which would be way lower than today's value, which means we would have massive inflation, which means we'd have to somehow live within our means in the US. And we're so profligate, we can't do that. It would cut the average family's lifestyle by a third if we had to live within our means here. And you think these midterm elections are going to be tempestuous? Try cutting everybody's lifestyle by a third and then see if you get reelected.
Craziness. But that's the world that we are inhabiting at the present time, and there's just really no way out. Hey, when you look and you see what the media says about the war, and they don't even touch this, other than like Zero Hedge, a few other so-called fringe websites, the media hasn't touched the dollar story with a 10-foot pole. I wonder why that is, John.
Well, because they're employed by big corporations. If you were wondering whether the U.S. corporate media was basically paid and run by big pharma, the pandemic pretty much put that to rest. They clearly are. And now this Russia-Ukraine thing proves that the military-industrial complex is just as influential with the corporate media as big pharma is, because who makes money from this? Just follow the money, all right? Nobody benefits from this except the guys selling the weapons that are being used up. Every time some country out there shoots off a bunch of its missiles or fires its automatic rifles, all that ammo has to be replaced. Who replaces it? Raytheon, General Dynamics. And so who tells the mainstream media to be in favor of every single war that anybody can conceive of? Raytheon and General Dynamics. And that's what's happening now. You turn on CNN or MSNBC, which are basically liberal news shows, and they're pro-war. They're like, why don't we go over there and just impose a no-fly zone on Russia? Which means, why don't we go over there and shoot down Russian jets? Shoot down the jets of the other major nuclear power on Earth. And it's like these guys honestly don't realize that we're risking nuclear war. Sean Penn, who you might have seen on the news here.
Try to avoid it, but yes.
He's an actor. And I used to think of him as kind of a thoughtful actor. He does a lot of indie stuff that is good, but not necessarily lucrative. He was on some news show the other day being interviewed, and he expressed his displeasure with the fact that the US is reluctant to use its nuclear weapons. And I'm not exaggerating. He literally said that, what a moron. And Ricky Gervais is right about actors by and large, that they're uneducated people who basically went to work in their craft right after high school. So they really didn't get much of an education on the way.
If they didn't drop out. If they
didn't drop out. Yeah. Yeah. And so, but now that they're in big movies and things like that, people think they're intelligent because they play intelligent characters. So they listen to what they say. And a lot of these guys have platforms on which to pontificate about what's going on in the world. And they just make total fools of themselves. And this is another example of that, this moron actor who should never be listened to on anything beyond the craft of acting, is out there saying he wishes we would have a nuclear war with Russia. This is scary, because we would have a chance of getting through this financial crisis and coming out the other end with a monetary reset and a sustainable system going forward. It'll be painful, but it's a doable thing. You can see how it would progress, but nobody can see how a nuclear war will progress. It could literally end the human race. We could wipe out most of the big Northern Hemisphere cities, cause a nuclear winter, which destroys the food chain, which causes billions of people to starve. Very easily from where we are right now. We're just a couple of stupid mistakes away from something like that. And I hope, well, first of all, I hope Russia and Ukraine and NATO are able to see the folly of their ways soon and just cut a deal, close this thing down, and everybody go back to licking their wounds and the status quo ante. The status quo of 5 years from now, before NATO was trying to take over the entire Russian border, we go back to that. And then we can get on with things. We can do a lot of good in the world. We can make a lot of progress from here, but not if we're lobbing H-bombs at each other. So
for sure. Well,
here's hoping.
Yeah, let's hope. Well, you go back to Sean Penn, speaking of him, he married Madonna. So right away, you got to question his judgment.
A couple of years married to Madonna, that could be a fun part of a young guy's life. We can't fault him for that.
Well, but breakout role was his most intellectual role yet in anything he's been in, and that was Fast Times at Ridgemont High. He was the stoner Spigoli, and that was where he got his start, and he played that role so well that you had to believe he wasn't that good an actor at that point. There's probably some truth to it.
There's a little bit of a poignancy to an actor whose best role comes when he's 19 years old. And ever after, and wherever he goes, it's like, hey, Spicoli, I'm sure for Sean Penn, because he's done a lot of other stuff, but none of it's been that notable. He's, like I said, he has an interesting career because he does things that aren't necessarily commercial, and he does them because it looks like it's fun to do them. At least I interpret what he's doing to that kind of a motivation. But yeah, the guy's not, I don't know. I lost faith in him now. Now that I know he's in favor of nuclear war, it's hard to see him in the same light.
Well, if you want to know who's in favor of nuclear war, just talk to those former leftists, all of these peace demonstrators. Next thing you know, Jane Fonda will come out and say nuke Moscow.
What happened to our hippies? They were a cool subculture that there are a lot of subcultures in the US that are interesting, small but interesting, and the hippies were one of them. And they've just evaporated now. God, we've really become a really strange culture. And you could say that Trump broke the left because he freaked them out so much that they went totally authoritarian because they were so threatened by this guy who came in and now Elon Musk is kind of doing the same thing. If he takes over Twitter.
Which I was going to get to. So poison pills, we go back, you and I, we've been around a little while, to the 80s when boards were trying to fend off hostile takeovers with poison pills. And guess what? It didn't work because all the acquiring or the raider acquiring company or the raider did was up their bid, because directors of a corporation, especially a public corporation, are these things called fiduciaries. And fiduciary means trust, which means that you will pursue the interest of the shareholders above your own personal interests. And there's been a Twitter storm going on, like since Jack Dorsey left the board, all of the Twitter directors, they own a total of 77 shares in total. I've never seen a board that had that little shareholding in a company that they're supposed to be in charge of charting its course. And now what I think has happened is with Twitter is that the possibility of their biased algorithms and all of their stuff behind the scenes of deplatforming people, and not just on their own, but in concert with other platforms like Facebook and Google, Yahoo, not Yahoo, YouTube, etc. It's all going to come out, and it's like rats caught in a 10-minute fire, John.
Yeah, I got to say that this is hilarious to watch Twitter and the related media squirm because, they're coming out with some great quotes. Got to say, there was one, a writer for the Washington Post,
Yeah.
who said something like, "Oh my God, we can't let this happen. We can't have billionaires buying up crucial pieces of the media." Without mentioning that Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, and if it's like they're billionaire, it's okay, but somebody else's billionaire, forget it. And so these guys are just completely losing it. And I think if Elon Musk was just trolling these guys, he totally succeeded because he got them to act stupid and to betray their true nature, which is very pro censorship. These are authoritarians running and participating in most of social media right now. And if anybody had any doubts about it, those doubts have to be gone now. Watching how these guys flail around to I want to put in a plug, or not a plug, but just tell you to go visit Babylon Bee, which is a conservative satire site. And they've got a skit of a Twitter employee going into the corporate therapist office and talking about what it's like to have Jeff Bezos maybe taking over her country or her company. And he pulls out a Rorschach test where they show you ink blots and you tell them what it is. You say what they are. And she says, Hitler, Jeff Bezos, no, Elon Musk, and so she's just so freaked out. She sees Hitler everywhere now. And that's really the mindset of a lot of these people. They are just convinced that there are shadowy, evil people trying to destroy their lives. And, it was first it was Trump, and then it was the people who wouldn't take vaccines. And now it's the people who are opposed to the war against Russia and who are in favor of Elon Musk taking over social media. So it must be a really dark, strange place to live where most of those guys are.
Yeah, and we have a link to it in the show notes, so you'll be able to get there from there. But it's quite hysterical, and it's something that you have to behold to believe. But again, it's like the hippies, the cool people, are now the soft face of authoritarianism.
I got it, Kerry. Speaking of hippies, I have a neo hippie friend. And I got to tell you what she said the other day. We were talking about this, and she's very liberal across the board and everything. And she was saying how we can't let this kind of aggression. She was talking about how we've got to defend Ukraine against Russia. And I said, well, aren't you a little bit worried about starting a global nuclear war if you go in and do that? And she said, well, how do we know Putin's nuclear weapons even work? She's so pro-war. She's making up any kind of and and that's from somebody who's a vegan pacifist. That's what our world has become now. People who, in every other aspect of their lives, are ideological pacifists. They won't even eat an animal. If it has a face, she won't eat it. And yet she's basically okay with testing Russia's nuclear weapons by forcing them to launch them. So yeah, it's a contradictory world out there.
Yeah. Hey, well, hey, just in other news, did you know, like, Jeff Bezos, his grandfather helped found DARPA, and before that, he was a high-level director at the Atomic Energy Commission? Does that kind of sound like deep state stuff to you, John?
I did not know that, but he must be, if he's still alive, he must be so proud of what his son has become, you know, because
Grandson,
Jeff
yeah.
Bezos is a bigger part of the military industrial complex now than dad ever was.
Got it. But I just found that fascinating because something I didn't know. Also, Elon Musk was a member of Klaus Schwab's like junior World Economic Conference in 2008. Now, some people are claiming that that means that this is all a deep state plot. On the other hand, the other argument is this is a guy who, you know, maybe has seen the evil in the world and wants to expose it. But on the same hand, yesterday he launched a major SpaceX launched a major intelligence satellite. I wonder where it's gonna go surveil. Got any ideas? You think it might be like on the Russian border over there where the war's going on? And look, with NASA and everything else, I'm not saying Elon Musk is deep state. I'm just saying don't get your hopes up so high because every time you think like one party takes over and things are going to get better and then they get worse and then the other party takes over and you think things are going to get better and they get worse, things could get a lot worse. But I do, if he's just trolling here and pranking, he's done an immeasurable service because he's really exposed what's taking place behind the scenes in places like Twitter.
Which is the point of trolling. You know, you say something controversial or provocative in order to get your target to betray their true selves. And it's worked beautifully this time around. You know, it's not that it wouldn't be fun if he actually did take over Twitter, because to take over Twitter and then just eliminate all speech restrictions would be hilarious. You know, I mean, it would be messy, but it would be really interesting to see the people who are censoring now have to actually debate their ideas instead of just shutting down the people who disagree with them. And you know, I think it would be a fascinating conversation.
There's a thought for you, like reasoned dialogue and debate. I thought that was against the rules here, but maybe you're onto something here, John.
One other thing, one other quote from the media about this, and I don't remember who the talking head was that said this, but they said, you know, an unrestricted internet is every dictator's dream.
Yeah,
which is exactly the opposite of the truth. You know, free speech is a threat for dictators, not their dream.
And that's to imply that we have an unrestricted internet, or I guess they're saying that we don't. That effectively censorship rules.
No, they're saying if Elon Musk took over, we would get an unrestricted internet, and that is what the dictators of the world want: free speech.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
So, in other words, ignorance, you know, strength through ignorance. This is as Orwellian as it gets, John. I mean, that is pure Orwell.
Mm-hmm. That absolutely is. You know, silence is democracy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's ignorance through strength.
Mm-hmm.
What was the other one? Well, the Department of Truth, the Thought Police, all this, it's all coming true, and you gotta wonder. Anyways, we're gonna have those links. I'm shooting the links to you now, John, for that Bezos article. Fascinating. I'll send you the one also on Musk. Just you know, don't be so sure that anybody's a savior, even though they might be holding themselves out to be. In any event, we're done for now. Make sure you go over to dollarcollapse.com, sign up for John's newsletter, read his latest works, and financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Please sign up for our free newsletter. And if you got a question for John, myself, shoot us an email or put comments up on the YouTube, and we will get you an answer. John, we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Kerry. See ya.